So, hello there. Good evening. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. I'm Anna China, and we're going to work today with four language skills. Not the four today. Today, we're going to be focusing on listening and speaking. So, buckle up and let's get started. Today, listening and speaking. Next week, we're going to look into reading and writing. But language skills, we always work together. We study the different language skills, but when we teach, we try to mix and blend all the skills. So let's get started here today. Reading and listening, they are skills that involve receiving information. So they are called receptive skills. Now, speaking and writing, they involve producing. So you will produce words, phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. Therefore, they are called productive skills. So we're going to deal with language learning and language teaching, considering skills. Now, why do we teach receptive skills? Why would it be important to teach receptive skills? Well, because the receptive skills is the input of information. And then the speaking and writing, it's the output of information. So that's really important. So we teach receptive skills to help learners develop the necessary skills to understand and interpret spoken or written materials. That's why we teach them receptive skills, so that they can tackle and understand. Reading can be a little bit tricky. Some students may think that reading is a simple task, but it's not reading words isolated. It's reading words as a group. So you need to find meaning in what you read. That's when reading can become a little bit tricky for some students, because in their mind, if they can read the words, they can read. But in fact, they can read words. But reading involves more than just reading words isolated. Now, listening, it is a two-way street. So someone will produce and someone will receive. So the speech and sound, they involve initiating sound, speaking categories, tones, intonations, accents, just like piano keys. So they each have a specific function. The receiver involves processing an image, relates to a meaning, and just like reacting to music, you can feel sad, your mood can change according to the music that you hear. And that's the receiver too. If he understands, if he doesn't understand, if the message is clear to him. So it's a two-way street. What is initiating sound? Well, it is the airstream mechanism, and you have to have this in order to produce sound. So if you don't have this initiating sound, you will not produce the sound. So it is called initiation. It's when you start to make the sound to say your words, and then that will become a sentence or that will become a speech. So this is important. What is the function of intonation and tones? Well, this is really important. Principally for English. English does have slightly a different intonation than many other languages. In linguistics, which is the science, the field that studies language, intonation is the fluctuation of the voice as we speak. And tone, it's the emotion that we put in. And accents, of course, it's the different ways that you blend sounds and you pronounce. So accents is connected to pronunciation. It's missing here. I don't know what happened. I was typing somehow, but just so here you should include the word pronunciation. So in English, the majority of the sentences, when you are in an academic or corporate business or in a corporate world, your intonation, it should be always down. Whether it's a statement or a question, your intonation will go down. So you're not going to say, what's your name? No, what's your name? So intonation, of course, when you're speaking with friends or family members, it's informal, your intonation will fluctuate much more. But in academic and business, you always should keep the intonation going down at the end of the sentences. The tone, of course, at some moments even in the corporate and business and academic world, we can feel touched by some topics. So we eventually express that. But certainly when we're in a more informal environment, we tend to incorporate more tone to our speech when we talk. And accent, that's something that just cannot be, you have to, of course, we can reduce accent, but accent, it's a cultural identity. So you don't really have to worry about having an accent or not. I speak 3 languages and now I'm learning my 4th. And in every single language that I speak, I do have an influence of the other language because I learned 2, 3 languages simultaneously. I didn't have a first language. So that an accent will always be present, whether I'm speaking English, French, Portuguese, and now I'm learning Arabic, and I'm sure that my Arabic is full of accent. But yet, so accents, they are a cultural identity. Many years ago, when the audiolingual method was introduced, the intention was to eliminate and to make the learners sound like a native speaker. So we would have those labs that we would sit and listen and repeat in order to sound. Nowadays, it's much more about communication. It's much more about the skills in communication than sounding like a perfect native speaker, okay? The speech classifications, they are a monologue, which is planned. The monologue is very well planned. So most of the time there will be the word sentences and will be very well organized, no redundancy. Now, if a monologue is unplanned, definitely there will be a lot of redundancy. A dialogue is usually interpersonal. It can also be transactional, like a business. Unfamiliar, when someone is asking you and you're not familiar, or you can be familiar with the subject. Second language learners, they need to pay attention to factual information most of the time. The tasks that we usually, develop in class, they tend to be more factual information because that's how they learn how to identify language and how to improve their listening skills. Well, the kinds of listening performances, the reactive. So that's when you listen to the surface structure and you react. You don't really go deep in. So that's called the reactive. As a listener, you just listen to the superficial. Intensive. Now, so these kinds of listening, it's when we plan our tasks as teachers and we include, we analyze, and we identify the type of listening that we're going to develop with them. Most of the time, we go with intensive listening or sometimes responsive. Reactive, it's not really common to do, but it's when you listen and you expect them to react, to answer, to reply. So that's the reactive, but without interaction, just question, answer. And that's like, for example, how many legs does a spider have? So it's like, now intensive, you focus on certain components of the discourse. So sometimes we want to teach, I'm sure that many of you have done this. You want to teach, let's suppose, articles. So you're going to choose a song or you're going to choose some kind of video and maybe, present the transcript with the gaps for the articles. So that's the purpose. So that's an intensive listening task. Responsive is immediate response from the learners. So then they're going to listen and you want them to respond immediately. So that's responsive. Very similar to reactive. Selective is when they're scanning for specific information. So let's suppose you play a lecture, a short lecture of 2 to 3 minutes, and the lecture describes several characteristics of an equipment, and you want them to identify the components of that equipment. So you tell them there are 5 components that you have to listen and identify. So that's very selective. Extensive is when you develop a top-down global understanding of the message. So then it's not really specific words or specific It's not a specific grammar component that we're teaching. It's for them to have the overall message. And interactive, it includes all of the above as students actively participate in discussions and debates. So they do role play. One will speak, the other one will listen, the other one will react. So then it's much more interactive because there is a sequence of the people speak at different moments, and whoever is not speaking is listening, but will have the speaking time. So it's the input and output. The interactive will deal with both of these ideas. Now, when we teach listening and comprehension, once again, we teach with a purpose. We want them to learn and to improve their listening skills. So in an interactive, we're going to develop a specific competence. So the competence of listening and replying accordingly to what he listened to. So there is a dependence of, so it's a receiver. At some moments, the speaker will be a receiver. At some moments, he will be a speaker. So that's the interactive. Now, the techniques, they have to be motivating. The students have to be motivated. So selecting teaching material for listening is quite tricky. Songs, they mostly enjoy, but we can't limit our listening, classes and our listening teaching to songs. You always have to go for authentic language. That's one of the best options. So TED Talks, BBC, and nowadays with the resources, you can even reduce and increase the speed. So if it's a lower level class, you can reduce the speed of the presentation. If it's an intermediate or an upper intermediate, they can play at the regular, at the regular speed. But there are these resources now that you can just select as the video at the bottom. There's that little circle, that little engine, the wheel, and there you can select the speed that it can reduce or maintain at the regular speed. Now, whenever you give a listening task, you have to know what to expect from them. What do you expect from that task? So carefully consider the possible answers, and so always test your listening task. Encourage that they develop listening strategies. So such as after they have done the listening task, for them to recheck, understand their mistakes. Understanding mistakes is one of the best ways to improve. Keywords are always very important, because what is a keyword? It's a word that is repeated several times. When words are repeated, it's because that word is an important reference, and the word is being said, and most of the time a concept will be built around the word. So let's suppose we're listening to a lecture about soccer, explaining how the soccer match is organized, how many players, so soccer players, soccer field, soccer match. So the word soccer will be repeated several times, but each time it's repeated, a concept will be built around it. Non-verbal cues. So unless it's a podcast, you have non-verbal cues. That's facial expressions, movements, when you shrug you can shrug your shoulders. So that also is important in communication. Predicting a speaker's purpose. So that's an activity that you can do with your students. Use the surrounding, use the images so that they can practice. In many tests, TOEIC, CELPIP, for example, describing an image is one of the tasks that they have to do. Guessing meanings, that's something that they also have to learn, because they won't always have a dictionary at hand, to check meaning. Teaching them how to seek for clarification, so to communicate with the speaker in case they don't understand. How can they approach the speaker and request for clarification? And always, of course, listening for the general gist. This is a task that is very important to develop frequently so that they understand that they don't have to, so that they understand that if they don't understand word by word, they will still understand the general idea. So that's why it's important to frequently do this type of task. Now, there are bottom up and top down listening techniques. Include both of them. Include the bottom up and top down. The bottom up, it's the technique uses sounds to words to grammar. So, and then the final product is the message. Now, when you go top down, is when you have the students have previous knowledge of what is going to be, of the task that will be attributed to them, to the assignment. So it's a topic that this is very common, for example, in English for specific purposes. So when you're teaching English to lawyers, so a lot of the jargons they're already familiar with. So that's going to be most of the time a top-down process. Now, if you're teaching new words, new vocabulary, new grammar, and you're using listening techniques, that's the bottom-down process, okay? Now, the following 8 characteristics of spoken language are adapted from several sources. So now we're going to shift from listening to speaking because they go hand in hand, right? So the 8 characteristics of spoken languages: clustering, redundancy, reduced forms, performance variables, colloquial language, rate of delivery, stress, rhythm, intonation, and interaction. We're going to look into a few that are the most, I think, that deserve attention. So when we're talking about clustering, what is a cluster? A cluster is when you have 2, 3, or 4 consonant sounds in a row. For many languages, this is very uncommon, but for English, it is common. So when you have consonant clusters, for example, of 2 consonants, as the word black, as in desk, and the cluster can be at the beginning or at the end of the word, okay? It doesn't really matter the position, as long as you have the 2 consonants together. Now, take, for example, helped. Helped is a verb that in the past, the pronunciation should be helped, because all the verbs that end with P sound when you add ed, the simple past, that ed has to sound like a T. So that is also a cluster, even though it's not a visual cluster, but it's a cluster that you hear. So that's why speaking and listening, they go hand in hand. Now, there are also examples of clusters with 3 consonants: string, tasks. So in tasks, it's the SKS, tasks, and 60. So 60, you have 3 consonants there. Here, there is a sentence. So this sentence, I would like you to try to identify the clusters. I'll give you guys 2 little minutes to analyze it carefully, and then we will be back. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let's take a look. So here are the clusters. So you have consonant clusters. Some are very obvious, like blocked, from, traffic, yesterday, and accident. So as you can see, the clusters, they can happen in the beginning, middle, and end. Now, consonants that, clusters that are less obvious. So you have, for instance, access. So ax, the C here, in fact, it has a x, access. The KT in blocked. So all the verbs that end in K or K sound, k, when you add the ED will sound as a T. So blocked, and x in accident as well. So you can see that some clusters you can visually see and others you will hear, but yet it is a cluster. Reduced forms are the words that they're not really written in English, but native speakers and fluent speakers, they use it. And it's important for students to learn and to recognize and use them. They will sound more natural. So for example, gonna, gotta, this is very good, common in songs and in, oral conversation. Now, I don't want to go, right? So you have these are reduced forms. Cause instead of because. I'm going to stay in tonight because I'm tired. Because I'm tired. So we don't say because I'm tired. So this is very common, as I said, for native speakers and fluent, those who speak English fluently. Don't know. I don't know what I want to do. So I don't know. I don't know. We don't say I don't know. I just say I don't know. Could you, would you, could you quiet down? So that's also, so these are reduced forms. Here they are written, but they're not really used in writing. They're only used in spoken language, right? Could you give me a piece of that cake, please? So even though you're using a reduced form, you still have the please there. So could you give me a piece of that cake, please? Look at the intonation, how it goes down. Give me, let me. So these are reduced forms. There are many others. Should have. So you would go shoulda, woulda, coulda. So we should have picked up a birthday card. So we should have, but when we're, so remember this, you will never use in written language, but you should teach that we use them in spoken language. Colloquial language is also something very common. So it is used in a, not in any kind of communication. It's always in a informal communication or with people that you're very familiar with. It's more of like a conversational style. So some examples. How can you identify? Well, they can be classified as slangs. Slang, it is considered a colloquial language. Abbreviations, contractions, idioms, turns of phrase, and other informal words, they are very specific. So for example, jargon. Jargon is not a colloquial language. Jargon is terminology that is used in a specific field. So you have law jargon, medical jargon. So it's usually, or it can be like jargon for those who go mountain climbing. There are specific words that only mountain climbers they use. So take, for example, wicked. In the northeast of the US, some parts of Canada, we use this a lot. Wicked means really or very. So this soup is wicked good. So this soup is really good. Contractions like ain't, gonna, you all. These are also colloquial words, different from reductions. Okay. Or if you take, for example, the word bloody, the word bloody is it's like we don't use it in the British people. This is a bad word, let's suppose, right? But for Americans, it's just an adjective. So in some parts of Canada, bloody can be used as, oh, that is bloody sad. That is bloody horrible. You can use that as well. So colloquial words also depend upon the region, sorry. Colloquial phrases, so hard to swallow. This is also, or idioms as we know them. Kick the bucket, up for grabs, and head over heels when you're in love. This is a very, so these are colloquial phrases and idioms. Once again, they're used in informal communication. We would not use them in a lecture or in a formal email when you're applying for a job, let's suppose. Okay. Now, the rate of delivery, this is something that many people take for granted, and it's really important. So the average person will speak around 125 words per minute. I don't. I've learned to speak a little bit slower than that because I teach English for many years, and I just kind of like learned how to speak slightly less at a slower pace, but yet fluent. But we change our rate of speech, of course, depending to whom we're talking, depending the circumstances, depending our mood. Now, it is not uncommon for public speakers to talk much slower, of course, to be understood. So in average, it will be 100 words per minute when we're giving a public speech or we're speaking to more people. You can test yourself. So you can record a slide presentation. Sorry, not a slide presentation, or even read aloud the text. And you can time yourselves, and then you can count the total words and record that. So then you take the time divided, the total words divided by the time. So for example, if you have a speech or a presentation of 641 words, and it took you 4.9 minutes to record, if you divide, the speaking rate will be 130 words per minute. So you should check that, see your speaking rate, and listen to yourself, see which rate you believe you will be better understood. So there are also in speaking factors that affect the oral communication skills. So for example, the native language. So the mother tongue sometimes will influence the sounds that an English speaker as a second language or as a foreign language will produce. So for instance, depending the influence, I know that my Arabic, because my ancestors, they're Arabic, and of course studying linguistics, the Arabic speakers, they have P and B issues. So they will say P, B instead of P. Some Spanish speakers, they don't have the Y sound. The Y is substituted by a J, so they don't say young, they say jung. So that's the influence of the native language or the influence of the mother tongue. Age can also influence in communication skills because children under the age of puberty, that's before they start to develop, their teens, they stand a chance of sounding like a native speaker if they learn English. The exposure also, what is the quality and the intensity of the exposure? So that will also influence and will affect the oral communication skills. Some people are just, talkative and they are innate. It's speaking for them is something that comes naturally. So some people, they just have the knack and they pronounce well. As some people, I think they're talented for music or they're talented for sports. I do believe that and science has shown us that some people are talented. So it's an innate vocal ability. Identity and language ego, one's attitude towards a speaker of the target language, that sometimes can influence, if you have some kind of, emotional barrier. Motivation. This is definitely, it plays a major role. So what is your motivation? Why do you want to improve your pronunciation? So the motivation will strongly influence the results, trust me. Now, speaking performances. So 6 types of listening performances were listed, right? We talked about the listening: reactive, intensive, responsive, selective. Now, extensive and interactive. In speaking, we also have speaking performance. So let's take a look. So the first one is imitation. It is performed not for the purpose of meaningful interaction, but for focusing. So, when we used to do, when we do drilling exercises with our students, repeat, repeat. So the purpose is, there isn't really, and it's not meaningful in terms of content, but it's meaningful for the purpose of muscle memory. Intensive. And this goes beyond the imitative. It's to include speaking performance now. So when we have intensive speaking performance, we want to include some grammar content or some phonics in order to improve and to expand our learners' scope of content. Responsive, they are short replies. So when they're able already to produce short replies. Transactional, that involves a dialogue. So they will be prepared. They will have the competence of answering specific questions based on interrogative pronouns or specific verb tenses, do, does for present, and interpersonal, for social relationships. So these are the speaking performances. So next week we're going to look into reading. So of course, you should go to your Canvas. In Canvas, you have the modules for listening and speaking. There's an excellent video that I encourage you to watch, the 4 skills. You can find it on your Canvas platform in the module of listening and speaking. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This content, it's really interesting, and it will help you understand better the tasks that you will prepare and develop for your students, as well as the tasks that come in many books that the schools where you teach will use. So definitely look into it, dive in and expand on this content. You will find a lot of information in Canvas for you. Thank you so much once again for joining me, and I'll see you guys again next week for reading and writing. Take care now. Bye.